Welcome to Creepy Tales Network. They say that the safest choice when going to college is dorm living. Well, you can be the judge of that after you watch this episode featuring The Dorm. Don't forget to like and subscribe for creepy news stories from around the world.
Hidden away in Europe was the small college I attended, exclusively for women. During my junior year, I had the good fortune to be assigned to one of the most historic residence halls on campus, the university dorms, which was an actual castle. A massive old stone structure adorned with towers, overgrown ivy, and intricate gargoyles that students dubbed their quaint home for their educational journey. It had been built nearly 1,000 years earlier, and so the halls were filled with thousands of memories of the past. Even though the rooms had been modernized, they nevertheless had the feel of a dream from a gothic medieval fantasy. I was already a hopeless romantic at 18, and this was the atmosphere that made me feel alive. Receiving a room in this castle actually really surprised me. I found it really crazy that I was able to choose my room, and that specific one in the tower was vacant. The room was a bit tiny, but the ambience and the structure itself totally outweighed the size of the room. All I would really be doing in there was sleeping and studying anyways. In that moment, I thought I was the luckiest girl at the school and jumped at the opportunity to put my name on that room. When I first moved in, the following August, everything was going really well. At least that is what I thought. It was my first year, so I knew it could be rough, but to my surprise things seemed to be going okay. I had made a few cool friends, and the professors were surprisingly really entertaining, and it made showing up every day for class a breeze. I thought, man, these next 4 years are going to be cake. I was so happy, I felt like I was just high on life. I couldn't have been more wrong. A few weeks went by and a heaviness had creeped in. Like a weighted blanket draped over me, I began to feel like my life was just deteriorating, like everything was going to fall apart. That everything would prove too much for me, and I wasn't strong enough to do this. I went from so confident in life to feeling like I was so weak, and to be honest, I just felt stupid and embarrassed and didn't know why. I would just cry. Without any reason, I would just sit there in my dimly lit room just staring at my lap and cry. I would look at my hands and my anxious fingers and just cry. I felt so dark, and my life seemed so pointless at that point. What was this all for? Why was I there? Was this all worth it? A part of me seemed to almost be watching myself from the inside, saying, "What is wrong with you? This is crazy talk. This isn't you." But something so much stronger was convincing me of these things. Was this depression? I had never felt these feelings. I kept reminding myself how well I was doing in school academically, the fact I had actually gotten into this school in the first place. I thought of my friends and family, and how they had my back in everything. I kept reminding myself of how lucky I was. But this feeling that my life was over was just so strong. I realized very quickly that this overwhelming heavy sadness would move in like a dense fog over my body every night as I returned to my room. It was so apparent at this point how much better I felt when I was with my friends anywhere else on campus, or even just in a class. Even though I knew this, I began to fully believe that enjoying spending time with my friends and going to class was nothing more than a diversion from the actual hopelessness of my circumstances. That my life outside of my room was just to distract from what a disappointment my actual life was. My crying became more and more frequent. The hopelessness became heavier. I would convince myself that I didn't deserve to even be there, and this horrible feeling of shame would come over my body. I began avoiding everyone and everything. I would decline any invitation from my friends, to go out, to go to parties. I would even leave class just to go back to my room. I began to become so dark and numb that I began cutting myself. 6 months ago, I would freak out at a paper cut. Nothing felt real, and I didn't know what was going on with me. At this point, there was no way to dissuade me from feeling completely hopeless when I was in this room. No one could have convinced me that I wouldn't fail, and this feeling of complete worthlessness was not valid. I believed it with all my being. My personality and presence had so drastically changed over those few months that my friends nudged me kindly to try to see the therapist on campus. I was completely against this because I thought it was pointless. But something happened one day that changed my mind immediately. There I was, sitting in my usual position on my bed. Tears streamed down my face. Crying, again. I had been trying to study for an upcoming exam, but I found myself back in that same position on my bed looking at my hands, just crying. The emotional pain that burned within me was so powerful that the thoughts of cutting myself just to release it was so overwhelming. Something had me convinced that hurting myself was the only thing I could do to relieve this agony within myself. As I sat there, I just closed my eyes. Why was this my life? At that moment, as my eyes were closed, I saw a girl sitting in front of me, clear as day, like my eyes were open, and she was 2 to 3 feet from me on the bed. Her face was covered by her long auburn hair that blocked her face as it hung down to her lap. The girl was looking down towards her hands, just as I had done almost every day for the past few months. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. At that moment, her head popped up and her eyes were looking deep into mine. She was crying so many tears, her nose running all over. I couldn't tell if she was sad or angry, she just was snarling at me. I felt a feeling of dread come over me, as I looked down at her arms and they were covered in blood. I knew in that moment that this is why I felt the way I did. I didn't know this girl, but she most certainly did not want me alive. She wanted me to be like her. I don't think I have ever moved as fast as I did that day. My eyes shot open and I bolted out of that bed. The room was filled with a darkness, a heaviness so unnatural to anything I have ever felt. The room was cold and it felt almost suffocating, like it was hard to breathe. It was no longer a sadness that I felt. It was something much more than that. She was still there, even though the bed was empty. I could feel her. I realized this was not me, this was the feeling of pure evil. I'm not one to be into supernatural things, maybe because I have never had been in a situation remotely close to this before. But this was real. I ran out of my room and straight to the community advisor. At that moment, I realized that I needed to find someone to talk to about all the things I had been feeling. I needed to reach out to someone. Out of everything I have ever done in my life, this was by far the hardest thing for me to do, to talk about these feelings. I broke down and started crying before the words could exit my mouth to the advisor about all these feelings of depression I had been having, and the self-harm. I told her how scared I was feeling and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to put into words the girl on my bed, but I didn't think anyone would believe it, so I left that part out. So much weight had been lifted off of me as soon as I finished talking about what I had been dealing with the past few months. I felt my old self starting to come back a little from deep inside. I could have bet that the community advisor would send me straight to the counselor as soon as I stopped talking. But she just listened with wide eyes, then paused for a moment and said, "Are you aware of the history of that specific dorm?" She informed me that they don't usually give this information to all the residents, for obvious reasons, but hearing what I was going through she felt it necessary to fill me in. The university had been open for hundreds of years, and over 200 years ago, they had a short-lived program that allowed children from poor families to attend this higher education as long as they did the maintenance and house duties of a servant, acting almost as slaves for the wealthy kids of their same age. It was a demeaning and ridiculous program by today's standards anyways, but it did occur. Those poor servant students would in turn receive an education, but it would be at a great expense to their confidence and self-worth, enduring that every day as they were trying to better themselves by gaining an equal education. My room, the smallest in that tower, was the actual room reserved to house those poor students. One particular girl that lived there endured years of constant harassment and abuse from those master wealthier classmates, who demeaned her into believing she would be nothing more than a housemaid. This girl began to fail her classes as the stress and shame became too much for her to bear. The university dean put in a request for her to withdraw from the school due to poor performance. They found her body lying in her dorm room bed. She had slit her wrists. The community advisor assured me that they would immediately find a new room for me and made the decision to seal that room off to any future student. During the week of waiting for my new room, I stayed with a friend off campus. The depression lifted the first night staying outside of that room. I know for a fact that I would not be here today to tell this story if I had stayed in that room any longer. Remember, always talk to someone if you are having any signs of depression or thoughts of self-harm.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of Creepy Tales Network. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe for new true life scary stories.